Yes. You are now a co-host, and yes, we are recording. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. So this is the virtual summer teaching symposium. We've held these from time to time in the summer with the idea that there's faculty who have some interesting things they're trying out in their classroom. Some of them are old, some of them are new, as old as classroom sharing, and as new as we have a person who will do student philanthropy with your students, and that's Ryan. So they're going to share some of what they do in the classroom with you all. We are recording this. So once those recordings are, pop into my file, I will send them to all of you. So if there's things you want to review, you can do that. And also there's at least 1 or 2 people who emailed me and said they would really like to come, but they couldn't make it. And so I'll send them the recording as well. So this is a pretty conversational event. What's the format is that our 3 presenters are going to talk a bit about what they do in their classroom that is something that might enhance your own teaching. Then they're going to have a conversation with each other. So the 3 of them will trade questions, maybe talk about some common elements to what they're doing. And then the last part will be Q&A from all of you. So I'll ask you to kind of hang on to your questions until that part. Unless it seems appropriate to throw them in earlier. And when we get to that part, you can either just unmute and talk with your question, or if there's a reason you want to put it in the chat, you can do that. Maybe it's a longer one. Maybe you've got a link to share. And if you want to do that anonymously, you can simply chat me personally, and then I'll ask your question, and I won't say who asked it. So all 3 of those modes are possible when you're asking your questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to the folks in charge here. So Joe Bognar from the music department, and Ryan Cole, director of student philanthropy, and Kelly Migler from the College of Nursing and Health Professions. And I don't know if you guys have worked out who's going to go first, but whichever one of you wants to go ahead and tell us about what you do in your class.
Great, I'll go ahead and start it. I was first in the order, so I had planned to do that. Thanks for the opportunity, Cindy, to talk about my team taught course, and thanks for all of you for your interest and your attention and feedback today. I have to turn the clock back to 2015 to when this was sort of originated. I was approached, I was chair of the music department at the time, and I was approached by fellow chair person Jim Caristi in computer science, who had learned of a combined interdisciplinary course that was being developed out at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And it specifically combined computation and rudimentary musical ideas. And they were hosting a workshop on their campus for the express purpose of kind of training other faculty to go out and do this course. And I admit I didn't buy into it right away. Jim actually had to attend the workshop on his own, but he came back full of ideas and energy. And so we were able to get together, I believe it was the fall semester of 2015, and offer this course for the first time. I taught it as if it was Music 101. Jim taught it under their number in computer science. I think it's 115. And logistically, we handled it as a common room group course. So I had my students, he had his students. But in reality, we were teaching a single course with identical content and learning objectives for all the students involved. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this will work, and hopefully it will also share sound as well. I know sometimes, yeah, let me click share sound so that that happens as well. So our syllabus had some common learning objectives between the students who were taking it as a computer science course and the students who were taking it as a music course. And it was a general education course at the 100 level for both. So we weren't delving deeply into either discipline. But students had to develop the learning objectives on both sides, although they could only get the Gen Ed credit for the course they were registered for. So no double dipping allowed. And so you can see some of the learning objectives here. Some of them deal specifically with computer science, write programs that use primitive data types. Some of them have more to do with music, understanding of a musical style and the ability to express the characteristics of what a style system is. And some of them combine the two, explain the processes of musical forms, such as the canon, and then simulate these forms in a programmatic environment. So our main kind of sandbox that we were using is a webware put out by MIT called Scratch. It had been out for quite some time, and it's a pretty powerful, I think I'm correct in saying it's an object-oriented programming situation here, where rather than working in a programming language per se, students build programs using the same programming logic that they would use in writing a computer program, but without having to deal with the language and the syntax of a computer program. And at the same time, they're manipulating musical material as the main element of their program. So here's one student project. This is actually just a very short assignment where the students are asked to create a little program that will simulate what's called a drunkard's walk. Drunkard's walk is a mathematical idea whereby you start at a given point and you stray from that point just a little bit, usually by a random variable, and then over time you can, get pretty far from your beginning point, or maybe not far at all. And so this comes with a little animation. I had to teach about pitch and interval for the students to be able to accomplish this. And every once in a while, the seagull is programmed to squawk instead of sing. So it sounds something like this. All of that's programmed over here in these little, again, they sort of look like Legos the way they get put together. There was another assignment where they had to create a rocket ship that could transpose minor arpeggios. So we got to talk about what minor chords are, major, minor, what the act of transposition is. This sounds like this. And they're programming the animation as well that goes along with it. Not everything we did was quite as elementary, and we did some things that were more musically interesting. For instance, as a group project, we took a piece purportedly by Mozart. It's called a musical dice game. And Mozart wrote all these puzzle pieces, these individual musical puzzle pieces, 176 of them in total. And he created a little chart that mapped them onto the rolls of dice. And so you would roll the dice, and if you got a 4, you would take the puzzle piece 69. And if you rolled a 12, you would take the next puzzle piece and string those together to create a little musical minuet. And so we crowdsourced it among the class, and we were able to replicate Mozart's piece in the computer programming environment. It sounds a little bit more like put together music there. We've taught it 5 times, so our projects have evolved over time. Each time we've had a full room of students, and some who come with musical expertise, some who comes with computer expertise, and some somewhere in the middle. And so it's always fun to get that group together and to see what they come up with. At the end of the course, I'd like to show them a piece of actual computer code in a language like C, C++. And then we look at it and we realize that all the things we've been doing in Scratch, like making loops and doing conditional statements, all the things that are in that program, they've been doing all along. So it gets them to realize that even though they've been working with colored Lego blocks, that what they've been doing is actual programming logic. what I hope we can get out of our conversation today is kind of the interest level and obstacles we see in team teaching and interdisciplinary work. Valpo Connect, as it moves into its second year, is going to focus a little bit more on faculty support and resources for doing interdisciplinary work. And if we know where kind of the interest and the obstacles are, we can start to build a culture where these kinds of courses are more prevalent and more accessible both to faculty and to students. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joe. I'm glad you were able to share that and play some for us too. I'll wait until you unshare your screen.
I have to like give up my power here. Let
Yes.
me see.
There you go. Okay. And then Ryan or Kelly, which of you would like to go next?
I can go next if that's all right with you, Kelly.
Okay.
Great. So as Cindy said, I'm Ryan Cole. I'm the Director of Student Philanthropy Programs here. Thanks for inviting me to do this, Cindy. Though faculty is not my main role, I do teach a few courses. I teach Contemporary Issues in Philanthropy and Service as part of the Philanthropic Leadership and Service minor. And I do one of the pilot core courses on philanthropy and pop culture. So I've been thinking about this both in my own courses, and I've helped support what philanthropy looks like in a few other courses too. So in general, this is my 5th year of my position. I'm within student life, but the goal is really to get students to think about what it means for themselves to be philanthropic in all aspects. So I like to ascribe to a broad definition of voluntary action for the public good, knowing that not all students have financial means to donate right now, but what does it look like to even get connected with the nonprofit sector, whether it's related to their discipline, related to something they're interested outside of courses, and what might that look like over time to maybe be involved in a board or volunteer, get connected in all the different ways. I want them to be aware of that. So when I started this position, it was a brand new position. There wasn't really a model for what that could look like. So I just began exploring all the different pieces and how that might be entailed. After a time of exploring different options and what it could look like, there's 4 different areas that I tend to look at. I work on trying to connect around advancement. So I do senior class gift and helping students think about why donors give here. I do stuff with student groups, student organizations. So if any of you are advisors of student organizations, I help with that. And that ties in a little bit here because I help manage some of the fundraising policies. So if there's ever any philanthropy or fundraising aspect within a course, I can help you think through some of those logistics. I work with trying to engage the community. So I do some stuff with the Community Foundation, United Way. We have a donor advised fund at the Community Foundation that allows us to, when students fundraise, since we're not really supporting the use of Venmo anymore because of IRS implications, students can fundraise, the money goes to the Community Foundation, and then we send it through the Community Foundation to the nonprofits. So we have that tool as well. And then the other aspect is academics. So as I was exploring academics, I came across something that Northern Kentucky University does called experiential philanthropy. And it's really getting students to experience philanthropy in the classroom. So I'm just going to share real quick a general model of this, what it could look like. This is a piece from the Northern Kentucky University. They have a handbook that can kind of model what this all looks like. And this is a lot of different options. There's a lot of different versions of what this could look like, but generally there's a pool of money, usually a couple $1,000s in a classroom that students would have. They would work on identifying a need or cause that could be related to the course. They research nonprofits that are related to that cause. There's a class discussion kind of as far as how you evaluate that, how you invest, which nonprofits might they choose, and then students have reflection and kind of presentation on it. So that's a general model. I started looking at that, and then I learned probably around the same time that Martin Bunicki in the English department does a learning by giving course. It's another way to think about this, focused on American traditions in giving and serving, where throughout the semester they're reading different literature on philanthropy, giving, serving, but the students are also serving as a board. That class has funding from a foundation connected to Doris Buffett, where they decide where $10,000 will go, but $10,000 will go by the end of the semester. So they come up with what's important to them, They create a mission statement for their board, and then they all do research on different nonprofits, come back, present them, create rubrics for how to decide that. But they get that experience of giving, and it helps strengthen and amplify the context of giving and serving in that class. Another unique one, which is how I got more connected with talking about this with Cindy, was the biology class that I worked with last year. Christy Bogaiski was the fellow through CITL, and she wanted to do a fundraising course as a capstone with the biology students. So that one was specifically around fundraising related to a biology topic. So she was teaching about malaria, but got the students to think about what it would look like to decide on the nonprofit that they would research around malaria. So students presented on the issue. Then they went out and had to go research some nonprofits that did stuff around malaria. It could be getting bed nets. There were different approaches, could be policy change. But the students did that and then came back and presented that to the other students, and they would talk about it, decided which one they wanted to support. And then that course didn't have any funding that they were giving. The students were, the rest of the semester, this was chosen probably within the first month or so, the students came together to decide how they could advocate for this organization, this cause, and raise funds for the organization that they chose. So they ended up doing something at Aftermath, but there was a lot of different ideas on what that could look like. So there's a discussion of like, what does this even look like to raise funds? But the good part is also they get to evaluate what makes a good nonprofit, what makes a good way to impact these issues. So those are two models of what this could look like. I've seen through Northern Kentucky too. It could be maybe there isn't fundraising, maybe there's not funds, but you're donating your time. So the students decide which organization they want to help write a business plan for. And then by the end of it, one of the organizations might have a business plan to do that. So you can implement this in many different ways. I mentioned the Northern Kentucky piece. I'll send the handbook a link to you all. They've been doing it for 20 years and it's been across disciplines. So part of it here was I just want to continue to let people know about this. I think it's an exciting opportunity. I'm willing to help be a resource in thinking what that could look like, because there's all different models for how this is, and it's not a new course. A lot of these, it's just figuring out how does it tie in with the learning outcome that you already have. Students get the opportunity to learn about all the nonprofits that are related to the issue areas that you all are already talking about, because there's work out there being done within the nonprofit sector. And then who knows, they may volunteer or want to be more involved with those organizations down the road too. So I'll be able to cover more as we have a discussion, but that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to mention right now.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ryan. And I'm particularly glad to have Ryan here because I know a lot of faculty don't even know that we have a director of philanthropy who does this kind of work. So I want everybody to know he is a resource that anyone can work with. Okay, and that leaves Kelly.
All righty. Okay, so I teach in the College of Nursing and Health Professions, and I teach in the undergraduate nursing program. And the specific course that I'm going to talk about is my OB course, or maternal newborn course, where I have started, let me see if I can share my screen, where I've started using simulation in the classroom. We have a sim program where students go and participate in specific simulation experiences, taking care of simulators with specific health issues. But I've decided to bring it into the classroom to help my students apply concepts that we are learning related to patient care. So just, you know, an introduction of simulation. We have a international organization that oversees and provides guidance and policies related to what simulation is and how it can use it. So it's basically creating those real life experiences that students can participate in and take what they've learned and then apply it to actual patient care, but not in the patient care setting. So far I have created 2 of these simulation classes. They're basically a flipped classroom. I have two topics. One is focused on client or patient education, where they are teaching a new mom about how to breastfeed and bottle feed. And the other one is nursing care and helping a woman in early labor manage her pain without medications, so non-pharmacological methods. The students have to prepare for class before coming to class because there is no lecture. So they have a reading assignment. They have to watch a recorded lecture that has the content for that topic. And there's usually other videos that are assigned related to the topic that will be used in the classroom activity. So that I know that they're prepared, they have to complete what I call a ticket to enter, which is 5 questions they have to answer and submit. But by answering those questions, I know that they have gone into the reading assignment. They have watched the lecture, they have watched the videos, so that they are prepared once they get to class. And then once they get to class, we have a patient care scenario. And the students, unfortunately, because I can have anywhere between 35 to 70, 80 students in a class, once they all come to class, they are then assigned a role. And they will either be an active participant or they will be an observer in the simulation. And there is research that shows that by being the observer, they are also learning through the process of simulation, because they're sitting there and they're thinking, oh, well, I would have done it that way, or I wouldn't have done it that way, things like that. So both roles are a learning opportunity. The interesting part of this whole activity is I then become the patient. I leave the classroom and I come back as the patient. It's kind of like a little theater session. I change my look. I will wear a wig. I will dress as a patient in a patient gown. For the newborn feeding simulation, I have a bassinet that we have an old one from a hospital. I have my newborn simulator, little mannequin baby. I have already brought in all the supplies that they would need for the teaching, and they have been assigned cards that have the different topics that they had to prepare for. And as I ask questions, I walk in and say, oh, my nurse told me to come here because someone would help me learn how to breastfeed my baby or bottle feed my baby. And then as I ask questions, students have to come forward and actually do patient teaching with me, as if they were going to do that with a patient in the hospital. And that's about a half an hour, 35 minutes. And then once that's done and we've gone through all of the questions that pertain to the education, we then have a debriefing. And so we go over the experience, make sure that all the content or topics that they need to know, they have gotten through the simulation experience. So we then review, answer any questions, because they will then be tested on this material on the exam, but without having it been lectured in the traditional sense in the classroom. And I was a little worried at first that students would look at me and be like, the first question is, okay, I have to teach myself. So I have to do all of this before I come to class, and they're not going to like it. Well, once they come to class and they've done one of them, they're like, that whole thought of teaching themselves, they don't even think about it anymore, because they just become so engaged in this activity and they actually want more opportunities. But I have to be careful because there is a lot of prep work for that type of class. So I had to be careful not to overwhelm them. And it has to be topics that would lend itself well to this type of format. So that's the kind of thing that I've been doing to just kind of get my students engaged and excited about coming to class. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Kelly. Okay, three very different approaches. Gina gives a big thumbs up to classroom innovations. So I'm now going to ask Ryan and Joe and Kelly to chat with each other about these three things, maybe even commonalities you see, or just questions you have since you're doing similarly unusual things in the class. So go ahead, you guys.
Well, I know nothing about music, and I know nothing about computer programming. So Joe, I am so intrigued and so confused by your class, but I would never have thought to put those two classes together. And I think that's interesting how you did that.
Yeah, and you know, props to Jim, who's not on this call and enjoying, I think, at least semi-retirement. I think, you know, he comes from a musical background. I also was a math major, so we were kind of a nice natural match to put together for this. But yeah, how it's such an interesting thing to come out of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, the idea that they were trying to teach basic programming thinking, but they wanted to do it in this environment that was with sound and with music, which this program is you know, set to do at a pretty sophisticated level. So I've learned a lot about, I knew nothing about programming going into this. I trusted him on that end, and I think after 5 iterations, you know, I've certainly improved my skill at doing some, you know, basic logic level programming solutions. Yeah.
Yeah.
In hearing you talk about simulation, you know, we've just started a music therapy program in our department, and I've been observing some of the classes, and they also use simulation. They simulate sort of the client therapist relationship, and coming in, and one student plays the client and has a certain profile, and then the therapist has to react to that and lead them through an exercise. And so I see certainly some commonalities there in terms of what that program is doing.
Yeah.
So I was curious a little bit about when you were describing the course, you said that you each kind of do your own section, correct? So do those classes ever interact, or were they both doing it?
So a common room group means we have 2 separate classes, but they're always meeting together.
Okay.
And that was sort of the logistical solution we had to the fact that we wanted to teach a class together. So it's really one class. Some students are taking it under the music number, some students are taking it under the computer science number. But we're always meeting together. Jim and I are both at the front of the classroom, teaching simultaneously. So there's no real, from the student perspective, there's no real split.
Have you looked into doing this in any other of your courses, or is this kind of your one?
Well, so I teach music theory as well, and that's just strictly a music major course. And I find that there are occasionally topics that lend themselves well to being programmed, so that the students can see that it is a process, and it's a process that follows a particular procedure. And so I have brought it into I don't expect the students to be able to program, but I can use the program to help demonstrate some things in my other classes.
Nice.
Ryan, I was curious, you mentioned 3 different kind of avenues. The one where there's a pool of money to distribute, and the class works on researching recipients for that. There's one that's more that has maybe the fundraising component also in it, and then there's one that's maybe more like service learning.
So each the experiential philanthropy in general follows the service learning pedagogy, but there's different approaches of whether or not you have a pool of funding beforehand. So it's also just getting students to think about like what other resources there might be. In the handbook they have here, they have 10 different models. Sometimes it's even narrowed down to the faculty member deciding, like, I'm already going to work with this nonprofit. But then the students get to do a site visit to the nonprofit, learn about them, maybe volunteer there, and decide how they might want to support this particular program or project at that site too. So there continues to be just creative ways as far as like, what are the resources that students can offer? But also what type of control do you want? There's another one where students don't actually, they work with a foundation, and the foundation then has a pool of applicants, and the students look at all those applicants for the funding, and they give recommendations too. So it just depends on community partners, resources, and there's definitely a lot of different angles you can go, but it always has that discussion component as far as the students exploring, learning about their organizations, talking about it, figuring out how they want to decide, and then reflecting on that experience too. So did that help explain a little bit more of the options too?
Yeah. There's a sort of a spectrum of how to approach that. Does your office have any resources or leads on donors who are interested in funding projects like this?
It's kind of what comes first, the chicken and egg. I have some funding in my position to do a few things. So I've done some of this extracurricularly, where I've done like pop-up giving circles and put forward $500, and I've done matches. So there's always potential to explore that if a faculty member was interested in that. And then I have a few organizations that might be interested. And if there was more faculty that were interested, I would definitely look to see if we could find funding sources from that point as well. So nothing like, no one's just like waiting there, but if there was more interest, I'd definitely look to explore more.
Ryan, did you mention that you could also kind of incorporate this within a course? That's because I teach a global health course where we go over a lot of global health issues. And a lot of times the students, they're very interested, and I make them think about things that they haven't really thought about outside their little box here in Valpo. And then they start thinking, well, but I'm just one person, and how can I make a difference? How, yeah, I see all these issues and all these needs. And so then you're making me think, when you had mentioned the group of students or the class where they had to choose an issue and then research nonprofit organizations that provide resources or assistance with these, you made me think, maybe is this a way that I can bring it to life for my students, and then have them actually realize that there are ways that they can help or make a difference on a small scale, or, you know, as a group just here in Valparaiso, Indiana.
Yeah, one of the big reasons people are pursuing this is just kind of that idea of getting that, being a steward of place, specifically engaging, understanding that you can make an impact. It wasn't until I started exploring this more that I realized I actually did a course like this in undergrad. It was a global health course. And we actually looked at different nonprofits and then decided on one. And there's a lot of reasons as to why we might have chose that one, but then we did a fundraiser down in the park, and it just meant more, it amplified the learning outcomes a lot more, just because I could put it to practice and think about like, oh, they're doing this doesn't seem that effective, our money might go better somewhere else, or those types of things too. So you can definitely brings it forward.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued. Now I'm going to have to look at my course.
I'm going to jump in, Ryan, because since Kelly mentioned global health, Christy's class, it was a biology class that you embedded in, but because it was focused on Malaria Day, the project they chose was related to international health. So could you talk a bit about what they chose to fund and how much they were able to give to it?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the nonprofit now. There was I think there were 4 nonprofits that students presented. The one that they ended up choosing used to be called Nothing But Nets. I can't remember the new version. It's United Against Malaria, I think, is right now what they chose. And their premise, theirs was specifically on malaria, but one of the organizations they looked at was more of a policy organization that was just looking at trying to impact policy. One was getting more towards the bed nets. So the discussions became like, what kind of impact do we want to make? Do we want to make impact like to prevent people from doing this, or do we want to support an organization that maybe we don't actually know where that money would go because it's just supporting them doing this policy work. So that led to some interesting discussion and thought process behind that too. And they did a ranking and voting for that to decide, but there could be more discussion from that there. But the students presented like 3 or 4 different perspectives on how to approach a social issue, which is another good thing that can come from it. That's not one way to tackle a social issue.
Well, this feels like a natural pause. So I'm going to say, let's jump into phase 3, which is where anybody on this call can ask a question. And you can either just unmute yourself and ask it, or if you want to put it in the chat for some reason, we'll take a look in the chat and look for questions there. So I guess if you want, yeah, Christine. Or Chris?
Hi. Yeah, either one. Yeah, thanks for putting this together. This is really interesting. I don't know if I have a question, but I guess what I thought was really interesting is this kind of collaboration between nonprofits, digital, and like, well, everything that we just saw. I started a nonprofit a few years ago and still run it. And so I'm really interested in that, Ryan, and would love to talk to you more about that and involving students in that way. And then I think Joseph and Kelly and like I think there was Andy, like, so I'm just thinking about like with Martin. So I'm going to be teaching in the English department, but I'm a writer and storyteller. So like collaborating in ways to do like digital gaming, like maybe Martin, but also the and I don't know if since my time at Valparaiso, if there's ways to collaborate with storytelling and theater and producing. I know that there are playwriting classes as well. But I was just kind of throwing that all out there as collaborative classes, I guess.
This fall, we're doing She Kills Monsters. We're trying to coordinate that with, it's based off D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, and we're trying to coordinate that with the gaming class with a few things that George Potter is directing for us, and we're going to try and do some sort of integration with the actual class and the gaming class, and we're going to see how that goes.
Oh, that would be cool.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. As you could probably tell by his background, Andy's with the theater department. But so you're already collaborating because George Potter's English. So he's going to direct one of the plays in your coming up?
Yeah, he's directed for us before. And it was a logical choice with what they did to the department. And I'm still trying to find a costumer, which I haven't found for the fall yet. I'm spending my summer trying to do that. And everybody I find is either busy or committed to something else. And people don't realize you got to book these things out like a ways in advance. People that freelance have jobs lined up 9 months out, 10 months out. And it's not like you can send somebody, get somebody. So that's what I'm really trying to figure out right now.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments, even if you don't have a question, if this stimulated you in some way that you want to bring up. I've been taking some notes, so I've got a few too. Dan, looks like you.
Yeah, I am muted. Well, Joe's not going to be surprised that I like what he's doing. He and I have some similar interests that we've established already. One of the things I think is interesting is that you said that so then a couple of things. One is that interests me is that they do the programming, and then at the end you were saying that you showed some code, and if I'm not mistaken, there's some more codey type sound environments out there that are still intended to teach people programming, but it's using sound as the sort of the medium. Mm-hmm. And I've used, not for sound but for my programming class, I was using this simulator called Carol that Stanford has, where it's, the sort of this gentle introduction to procedural programming. And so my thought was, it's probably a continuum out there, where on the one end you're doing block programming, and on the other end someone's writing just like hardcore code. But it would be maybe a possibility, depending on the tool that you might find, to have like one last assignment where they're doing the some level of procedural programming, maybe to duplicate something that they just already did. So they did the block programming, and then they use a textual programming to establish the same thing. I was offering that up as maybe a possibility. I don't know. But the other thing that I thought was interesting, when you mentioned the crowdsourcing of the one musical piece, has anyone crashed and burned with their contribution to that, and maybe needed to do some fixing? Or does that generally work when you're having the students put something together like that?
That's a great question. So if you remember those matrices, those grids with the dice and the numbers,
right,
we split the class into groups, and each group was responsible for a column.
Okay.
And then we had some of the more musically inclined students in the class. They were the proofreaders.
Okay.
So there was definitely some amount
fact checking that was going on.
Yes, no, you're right. Because we don't teach, the students don't learn to read music in that class. So we needed to make some groups where there was a knowledgeable music reader, and we finessed that. And we could do that with 36 students in the class. But no, in fact, we only ran that project once, just because of the size of it, and we haven't tried to duplicate it in subsequent.
Okay. Well, that's great. And I fixated on Joe's contribution, but I thought the simulation was absolutely wonderful. That it's definitely food for thought, no matter what the domain is. And then regarding the philanthropy, one thing that I wanted to mention is that the innovation hub is becoming more and more online through the School of Business and School of Engineering, and it might offer a interface. It's intended to be an interface to the community, and so there might be maybe some opportunities to work with the iHub to do some philanthropy work in addition, because that's a part of it. It's not all about just hardcore capitalism. It's more generally an interface to the community. So Dushan is the director. He's very nice. So
Dan, since you brought up, and Joe, you've been talking about the ones who had in your joint class who were strong musically, and then the others maybe strong with programs. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the challenge of that, because I'm guessing there were students who came in strong with programming and music wasn't their bailiwick, and vice versa. And could you say a bit more about how you bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do an assessment really early on where we ask them to self-assess themselves in a lot of different areas, ask them what they like to listen to, if they played an instrument in any way. So we try to get to know them early, so that if we do group work, and there is a lot of work that we do in pairs and in larger groups, that we can spread out the expertise. Fortunately, the level of programming and the level of musicianship that we need in the class isn't really that difficult. It's at a pretty elementary level on both. So we're able to kind of manage that a little bit, even though the end products are very sophisticated in themselves. But I think Jim and I try to keep in mind the fact that we are teaching a 100 level class, and even though we'd like to go into some pretty deep topics, we try to manage that a little bit. So, but we do have to be sensitive to that in that room. But Jim and I mean, we model that ourselves, in that he's the expert in one and I'm the expert in the other, but yet the students get to see that I'm learning the other discipline, and likewise with Jim. So hopefully we model a little bit of that too.
Yeah, Bob.
I'm wondering from the three of you, in terms of student feedback. I mean, you went through this with a group of students. What did you find in the course evaluations at the end of the term, or what may have surprised you that you could share with us in terms of the audience student feedback?
With my students, they love it. They they love it, and students in the College of Nursing know that you never know what you're going to get or who's going to walk through the door in Professor Migler's class, because I will bring the characters to life even outside of a class that's just not sim. They don't realize that they think that they just want the material given to them on a PowerPoint. But then when you do it a different way, then they're like, oh my gosh, I love that. That was so much better. So I've had all positive feedback in my evals.
Ryan, Joe?
Yeah, I haven't. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I'll just say quickly, most of the students really like the team teaching. They've never had that before. They like having the different perspectives and kind of the back and forth, so they like the style of presentation. Inevitably, some students wish they'll offer some comments about the balance, not enough music, too much programming, or vice versa. So we do we're constantly tweaking that to make sure that we've got the balance in check.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that I haven't done it a lot for my course. I've done pop-up ones within my course, but I sat through Martin's course the first year I was here, just kind of experienced that. And the students were so engaged in deciding, they had asked for extra time to decide because they weren't able to get it done in that one class period. So, and that's not, from talking to Martin, that happens quite often where the students are, because they've all kind of invested in the one that they did the research on. So trying to come to a consensus is hard, and they really get into supporting the organization that they're in. So I think they all like trying to figure that out and decide that too.
Do you sense a transformation in them, and from the beginning of the process through the end, in terms of their maturation or their level of thinking? That's for a question for all of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for mine, I think it's definitely just that greater awareness. I don't know if students are even aware, for one, how many nonprofit organizations there are out there, but then all the different work and the people behind it that do all that work to get those things done. So especially if they get to visit the site, they get to see who those people are and you get to have that interaction.
I have a comment that I'd like to add based on what was just said, and then something that Joe said earlier about Valpo Connect, is that I think that what's interesting is that, I mean, in a way, on the V website, everyone's interests are there, and yet in a way, it's hard to find someone who's interested in maybe collaborating in a particular way, or maybe I have a bunch, maybe I have equipment that can be used to do some particular demonstration, and someone in the room next door would love to have that demonstration done and nobody knows about it. And so I think that some sort of forum or some mechanism by which the innovative teaching that people are doing can be displayed, and then things that people would like to do maybe could get posted, and then some level of connections be made that way, because it just seems so often where two people are right next to each other with similar interests, but nobody knows what that, they don't know what that interest is. So
yeah,
that's particularly why I like this forum. This is really cool.
Yeah.
Find out what's going on in other people's classrooms and how they're accomplishing.
Yeah, and this is a mechanism for it, and I don't want to dismiss this at all. I mean, this is absolutely wonderful, but it'd be great to try and amplify things like this, in ways where if someone wants to, collaborate, they can find out who else is interested in what they're interested in quickly.
Yeah.
So
Amanda posted something in the chat that CITL does some of this already, but I'm going to put it to Joe that I know that you're one of the people running Valpo Connect, and maybe that's a way that CITL and Valpo Connect could cooperate somehow, is in some way finding a way to keep current information about what innovative teaching is going on, who wants to connect, who does certain skills well that maybe other people would want to know about. There ought to be a way to bring that about.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that year two, we start to see more conversation and focus and eventually support around this to support interdisciplinary teaching, interdisciplinary research. We hear this talk about new program development. It seems like sometimes we develop a program and we hope people will come, and maybe if there's a cluster of courses that are team taught and interdisciplinary, that programs will naturally grow out of them. So I think there's a lot of conversation to be had, and so I'm hopeful that in year two of Valpo Connect that is seen as a primary goal.
Mandy, did you have another question or
Yeah,
comment?
I just to follow up on my second comment, I think a lot of times it might be really fun to actually have a way to do shout outs for colleagues who are doing good work, because a lot of times they're pretty quiet about it. And I think it'd be, I mean, so long as it's not like mean or anything, I think it'd be really fun to have a mechanism where people get recognized for doing stuff, because a lot of people are doing cool stuff, but they aren't going to write Cindy and be like, hey, I'm doing awesome stuff, because that's just not how we communicate about what we do. And so like, I really do think it'd be fun to have like, what if we had an anonymous shout out box each week and like kind of profiled somebody on Seidel of like somebody who's like quietly being awesome somewhere, and just like, you can run, but you can't hide.
I love it.
It's a little sassy, but those of you who know me know that's par for the course. But I also think what would happen if if Valpo Connect did a faculty workshop takeover, I think Lissa's always looking for things for the faculty workshop, and it'd be fun to see what would happen if there was like kind of a takeover, and it'd be good press for the second year.
Yeah, I'm writing that down.
I'm
sorry, my
already
video was
envisioning
off and I was
Mandy, that-
listening, so then I came out with all the ideas at the end. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I'm already envisioning it for the new faculty on the call at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. We have an all faculty workshop, and a fair number of faculty are there, like 100, 120 of us all in one place at one time. It's the 2 times a year that happens. And I immediately pictured Mandy. We all get together at a table. We have these 2-minute presentation on what you do that might connect to what somebody else does. And then you move on to the next person, like speed dating or something, and see what kind of connections can be made by the end of even a half-hour session. I think that could be a lot of fun. Yeah. Chloe, you've popped up, so I don't know if that means you have a question.
No, I also, Mandy was saying that she was listening throughout the whole thing and then popped in. And so I said, I'll do that too. But I have nothing to say. I think it was all really interesting. I like this idea of team teaching and all, all the ideas that have come up. I'm fairly new to the teaching game here at Valpo. So just always looking for some fun ideas.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask Joe, I hope this doesn't put you too much on the spot, but since you early brought up that Valpo Connect would like to foster team teaching, have you guys begun to discuss what are some other ways you could foster it?
We had a conversation with the provost's office last year and thought of some ways, like perhaps there are proposals from teams of faculty, pairs of faculty who want to do a course like this, and a certain number of them are chosen each year, that the faculty would get full teaching load credit to do it, so that there isn't that penalty kind of built in. And then if those courses and that those courses are not penalized for under enrollments either, as they're trying to like get off the ground, and then maybe they could run into the future if then they could make some enrollments. We think that this is the way that maybe we develop new programs, is if they're seeded first by these kinds of courses. And so to be able to support those and to give the due teaching load credit for that, money for faculty interdisciplinary research was another idea that we put forward. So I'm hopeful that in the second year we gain some traction in that regard, because the first year was really focused on kind of clustering all of our sustainability courses together, and packaging them in such a way that we could gather student interest and enrollment around that theme, that interdisciplinary theme that touches just about every discipline. So I'm hopeful next year we can move it in the direction of these kinds of faculty things, because I think we can get excited by it, and the student interest will follow, the enrollments will follow, programs will follow. So it sounds like fertile ground for me.
Yeah, great. All right. That's, I think, a great place to end. When we began, I mentioned that we realized we forgot to include a little break between our sessions today. So I'm going to put a break in. We'll end this session a few minutes early so that those of you who are joining the next session can have time for a break and to come back. And just as a reminder, each of these sessions has its own Zoom room. So you don't just stay in this one, you actually leave this room and then go into the next room for the next session if you're joining us for that one. So thank you for joining us, and thanks to Ryan and Joe and Kelly for your presentation. It was really enlightening and fun. Thanks.